My name is Lauren Archer. And 3 weeks ago, I was forced out of the house I helped build for 25 years. They called it his property, as if the years I spent sanding floors, fixing walls, and holding a dying man's hand meant nothing. His daughter, Brooke Sullivan, stood on the porch and told me, with that smile only the cruel can perfect, "You were never his wife, just the help who stayed too long." The night I left, I slept in my car behind the same theater where I used to paint sets. By morning, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize: Camille Hart, an estate attorney. She said a name I hadn't heard in years: Tyler Monroe. He'd passed away and left me everything, $29 million, and his art studio. Then she added one condition: I had 90 days to create and sell a real work of art. Camille Hart met me in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe, her briefcase placed neatly between us. She spoke with the calm authority of someone used to managing chaos. "Tyler Monroe's will," she explained. "It was airtight, $29 million, and his old studio on the pier. But the inheritance came with a condition that could break me before it saved me. I had to produce a real art installation, my own work, and sell at least one piece within 90 days. No proxies, no charity buyers, no shortcuts." Before I could ask more, Camille leaned forward, her voice lowering. Brooke Sullivan had already hired Victor Hale, a ruthless inheritance lawyer, to contest the will. They were claiming Tyler's illness had clouded his judgment, that he'd been manipulated by pity. And while Hale handled the paperwork, Brooke was handling perception. She'd already reached out to gallery owners, whispering that I was unstable, that grief had made me delusional, that my art was sentimental junk. It wasn't just a legal fight, it was character assassination. Camille advised me to avoid court for now. "You can't outspend her," she said, "but you can outwork her." The idea struck deep. I'd spent my life painting other people's visions, backdrops, sets, illusions, never my own. Maybe that was about to change. Still, the thought of facing an entire industry poisoned by Brooke's rumors made my stomach twist. That night, sitting on the edge of my borrowed cot, I studied my hands, the same hands that had built stages for actors who'd forgotten my name. 90 days. One sale, against a woman with money, media, and a motive to bury me. I didn't plan to sue or beg. I planned to build. And this time, the spotlight would be mine. A week later, Camille arranged a meeting with someone she thought might help me. Her name was Avery Rhodes, a curator known for running an independent space called Iron House Studio. The place used to be an old steel warehouse on the edge of the waterfront half-gallery, half construction zone. When I first stepped inside, the air smelled of rust, paint, and possibility. Avery looked at me the way producers look at untested talent, curious, but cautious. She'd heard the rumors. Of course, everyone had. Yet instead of pity, her eyes carried a flicker of amusement. "If they're afraid of your work," she said, "maybe it's finally worth showing." I told her about Tyler's condition, the 90-day deadline, and the need to sell one real piece. Avery didn't flinch. She just nodded, the way people do when they've already decided. She offered me an opening, one single exhibition slot left open after another artist dropped out. It wasn't glamorous, it was survival space. Raw, concrete, and bare beams. But she gave me freedom. No themes. No limits. The only rule was honesty. I agreed on the spot. For the first time since Robert's funeral, I felt the faint pulse of control returning. That night, I started sketching my first concept, a full-scale installation built from reclaimed materials. I called it Hands That Built the Room. It would tell the truth about every woman who built someone else's life and was erased from the blueprints. And this time, I'd sign my name. I started with the rumors because rot spreads from the center. The reviews trashing my work all cited the same phrases, like they'd been copy-pasted with different adjectives. I marked dates, bylines, and posting times on a yellow legal pad. Patterns appeared, neat as nails in a row. One name kept repeating in the citations that fed the bigger pieces. He wrote a local culture column that often decided which shows got foot traffic. I pulled public social posts, charity gala photos, and tagged locations. There was Brooke Sullivan, smiling beside him at a private tasting. Then again, at a rooftop open house. I didn't need scandal. I needed leverage. I saved screenshots of gift baskets signed from Brooke's brokerage to his office. Invoices for sponsorship attached to coverage of her listings. Nothing illegal on its face. But it stank of arrangement. I printed everything and slid it into a folder. Camille read the folder in silence, then set it down like evidence in a bench trial. She told me to avoid spectacle and send a formal right to reply to his editor with the packet attached. Not an accusation, just the truth. Timestamped. Editors hate being blindsided more than anything. I wrote the letter clean and factual. I described my exhibition timeline, my credentials, and the specific misstatements. With references to the screenshots, we sent it certified and waited. On the third day, his column vanished from the paper's site, replaced by a bland notice about internal review. Brooke noticed faster than the public. That afternoon, a venue manager called to say our deposit for Iron House Studios' opening had been rejected by the payment processor. No reason given. But the tone said he wanted distance. When I reached Avery, she was already 2 steps ahead. "We keep the slot," Avery said, voice flat. "If they choke the card stream, we go off-grid." She offered me an alternate space she controlled behind the main warehouse. A raw yard with a corrugated fence and a view of cranes on the water. We'd wire our own lighting, hang our own rigging, and bypass whoever thought they could starve us out. I said yes before my doubt could speak. We drafted a new layout on butcher paper across the concrete floor. I compiled a materials list of reclaimed lumber, stale flats, and fire-retardant canvas. Every cut and brace would be visible by design. I paid in labor, not cash. I traded 3 days refinishing Avery's battered display walls for access to a scissor lift and a pallet jack. At dusk, I bolted a weatherproof time-lapse camera to the yard's corner post. If they wanted to call me a fraud, they'd have to argue with the footage. The work settled my breathing. I framed a kitchen corner, like the ones I'd built for other people's lives. Then sliced it open to show the bones, studs, screws, shims. I stenciled fragments of the worst lines from those rumors onto the back side. The part no audience was ever meant to see. When you walked around the set, the insults were right there, nailed to the frame. 2 nights later, a city truck rolled up with an inspector who introduced himself without small talk. A complaint had flagged our site for flammable waste and unsafe rigging. He walked the perimeter with a flashlight and a clipboard while Avery watched. Arms folded, I kept it professional and brought out my binder. I had load calculations for the truss, stamped specs for the fire-retardant paint, and a layout that kept exit paths clear at code width. I asked him what else we'd need to pass a day of check. He listed 3 items, and I wrote them down without complaint. We spent the night solving them. I swapped in fireproof drape behind the canvas, added a second emergency light over the west gate, and raised the extension cord off the ground with proper hangers. By sunrise, the yard looked like a shop manual, had shaken hands with the stage. When he came back, the inspector signed the temporary approval with a quick, decisive stroke. He didn't say who called the complaint, but he didn't need to. I thanked him anyway. Respect, even when rented, holds. Camille arrived with coffee and a thin smile that meant news. Tyler's will had an addendum we hadn't seen, tucked under a notarized cover sheet. In addition to selling a piece, I needed at least 200 visitors to sign a witness ledger stating they had viewed the installation in person. It sounded like punishment until I let it breathe. Tyler had built audience into the test. A demand for real eyes and real time. No private sale could shortcut that. No silent check in a back office. The work had to face the world and hold. I adjusted the plan. We designed the witness ledger as part of the experience. A raw wood table with carpenter's pencils and a placard explaining the requirement. Avery pulled a list of community groups who actually showed up to things: dock workers, union, theater techs, retirees from the shipyard, people who know when something is made right. The title wall went up in heavy block letters, hands that built the room. The first room was narrow on purpose, forcing you to feel the squeeze of someone else's architecture. The walls weren't drywall, they were joists, painted with tool marks and time. On the left, I mounted the wall of receipts, actual invoices from years of stage work, photocopies of call sheets, photos of my wrists wrapped in athletic tape. I framed them inside metal squares, like windows in a house I couldn't afford to live in. Across from it, I built the room of echoes. A lattice of scrap wood formed a cage around a small speaker array. We mixed a soundscape from shop noises, saws, drills, sanders under a low bed of recorded comments. The worst of them layered just soft enough that you had to lean in to hear. If you stayed too long, the words started to stick. At the far end, I placed the auction table, not a gallery plinth, but a builder's bench, scarred and clean. On it sat a series of smaller works, hand-sized panels of layered paint and sawdust, sealed under resin, each titled with the name of a tool and a year. A discreet placard listed the price and a QR code. No bargaining. No playa. I added one more element that would never make a sales sheet. On a steel frame, I mounted the time-lapse monitor, running a loop of the build from empty yard to finished rooms. No voiceover, no captions, just labor, compressed into minutes, moving like weather. Brooke tried to answer with polish. New posts appeared showcasing charity events and client wins, each one bright and frictionless. A whisper went around that a safety concern might cancel my opening, that permits were in review. I didn't chase it. I hung another exit sign, 2 days before opening. The paper announced a temporary suspension of their culture columnist pending an ethics review. His past coverage was under audit, especially where sponsorship overlapped with subjects. The notice didn't mention Brooke or my show, but it didn't have to. People can read between lines. That afternoon, Victor Hale filed an emergency motion to freeze Tyler's assets again, this time arguing that the public buzz around my installation proved undue influence on the decedent's legacy. Camille sent me the filing with a note that said, simply, keep building. Courts move at their own speed. Hammers don't wait. I kept my head down and finished the kitchen set's cutaway. I left the sink polished and the cabinet backs raw, so the pretty and the ugly had to share the same air. I lined the base with those stenciled rumors, then painted over them with a thin wash so they ghosted through. Most insults fade, none disappear. On the morning of install day, I stood in the yard alone before anyone arrived. The cranes on the water were slow and steady, lifting containers that weighed more than any history I could prove. I took a breath and walked the path like a stranger would. Hand on the rails I'd sanded smooth. Avery came with 2 volunteers and coffee. We taped the witness ledger sign to the table and set out the pencils. We cleaned the monitor screen and checked the sound levels in the room of echoes so the words stayed audible but never screamed. If people wanted to hear cruelty, they would have to choose to listen. By dusk, the lights warmed the lumber, the way stage lights warm an actor's face. The yard felt less like a workaround and more like an intentional place. The kind of place truth can stand. We ran a final safety check, counting exit markers aloud. When we finished, Avery looked at me like a stage manager before curtain. "Let them come," she said. It wasn't a dare. It was an invitation. I wrote my own name in the witness ledger, then turned the page for the others. The gate opened at 6, and the yard filled like a tide. People moved through the narrow entry, shoulders brushing joists, breath slowing as the structure pulled them in. The witness ledger found its rhythm names, zip codes, brief notes about what they felt. I stood by the auction table and let the work speak first. A woman in a charcoal blazer studied a small panel titled Wrench 2001. She introduced herself as Dr. Enuri. Miriam Cole, a professor from the university's art department. She traced the resin's edge with her eyes, then asked one clear question about process. When I answered, she nodded once and bought it for $5,200. The price tag wasn't a plea, it was a boundary. Camille watched me ring the sale on the tablet and exhale without smiling. Avery counted the signatures while the room of echoes murmured, shop noise braiding with the soft hiss of recorded contempt. The line at the ledger never stopped. At 7, we played the time-lapse on the steel frame. The yard hushed as the empty space filled itself in minutes. Beams rising, lights blooming, paint flashing wet and then dry. No voice told anyone what to think. The labor wrote its own subtitles. Halfway through the loop, a familiar posture appeared near the back fence. Brooke Sullivan had come dressed for a ribbon cutting that wasn't hers. Her eyes swept the room like a realtor measuring square footage. When she reached the wall of receipts, her jaw tightened almost invisibly. I didn't move toward her. I moved toward the monitor. The loop ended, and the screen shifted to a second file, audio levels set low, subtitles minimal and precise. It was a recorded call between Brooke and the columnist, obtained lawfully by a third party in the room. The words were careful, but the meaning was blunt steer coverage. Crush credibility. Keep me off walls. Brooke stepped forward, as if distance could blur context. She said the file was edited. That hate listens for confirmation and hears it everywhere. Camille met her at the light spill with a printed transcript, a certification stamp, and the original device. She spoke softly, the way people do when they are certain. A murmur rolled across the yard. Neither a cheer nor a boo. Just a shift in gravity. Dr. Cole returned with 2 colleagues and asked to see the construction notes for the room of echoes. I brought the binder, opened to load charts, and let them flip pages until they closed it like a verdict. We sold 2 more panels in 10 minutes. By 8, the ledger had broken 200 signatures. A union steward from the docks wrote, "Built right." A retiree added, "Feldsehn." A young carpenter scrawled, "I'm not invisible." I read them between questions about resin cure times and fireproof drape and kept my voice even. At 8:30, Camille's phone buzzed with the kind of message attorneys save for elevators. The court denied Victor Hale's emergency motion to freeze Tyler's estate again. The judge found the conditions rational, the medical competency clear, and the timelines consistent with a donor's intent to reward documented skill. Avery took the news like a stage manager, hearing the house is sold out. She didn't crow. She checked the exit lights and asked if we needed more pencils for the ledger. I nodded. Because winning is a job like anything else. And the work was not done. An hour later, the paper posted an update without fanfare. Their culture columnist was suspended, pending formal discipline for undisclosed conflicts tied to sponsored coverage. Past reviews were under audit. The post did not mention my name. But the room did not require it. The city inspector returned in plain clothes and stood near the entry, reading the safety placard like a man checking math. He approached me after a while and said the complaint that brought him earlier had been traced to a spoofed line. The department was issuing a fine for misuse of emergency resources. I thanked him for doing his job and asked if the exits felt clear enough now that bodies filled the lanes. He said they did, and left without shaking hands, which I respected. Some work is cleanest when it leaves no residue. By 9, 5 pieces had sold for a total of $27,600, and the ledger was thick with names. We closed the line gently and let the last few groups walk the path without hurry. The room of echoes lowered its volume by a breath, the murmurs settling into wood. Brooke waited near the fence until the yard thinned. She told me, in a voice that had lost its marketing gloss, that she hated me because loving her father felt like betrayal of her mother's ghost. I told her I forgave the child who learned the wrong lesson, and that the woman she became still had to answer for the harm she chose. She looked at the wall of receipts a final time and left without looking back. Camille filed the ethics complaints with the Brokerage Association the next morning. Attaching the transcript and the sponsorship invoices, I didn't have to touch it. Consequences are a kind of gravity. Within a week, the court finalized the transfer under Tyler's will, and the studio on the pier was mine in writing. I set up a workbench the way I like it, tools visible, cords teed, benches clean. The first check I wrote funded a program called the Build the Room Foundation for stagehands and scenic artists over 50 who needed a bridge. Avery asked me to curate a traveling version of Hands That Built the Room for 2 other cities. I said yes and kept the title because truth doesn't change its name to please a new crowd. When people asked what the show was about, I said it was about labor you can't launder. On a quiet night, I walked the yard alone one last time. The joists threw soft shadows like lines on a palm, and the auction table held nothing but faint resin rings. I touched the rail and felt the smoothness my hands had made. Thank you for staying till the end. If this story pulled something raw out of you, subscribe for more dark realism and poetic justice. Tell me what you'd have done in Lauren's place, fight in court, or win in daylight. Your stories fuel the next revenge. And your voice keeps this channel honest.